Hey, everybody, it's another emergency podcast here on This Week in Startups, and this one is a doozy. We're talking Theranos level alleged fraud. Two former co-executives at the now bankrupt lab testing startup uBiome were charged with healthcare and securities fraud, among many other offenses, in a 33-page indictment that dropped by a federal grand jury in San Francisco recently. They've allegedly, I'm going to say allegedly a bunch of times here, misled investors about their revenue numbers while cashing out $12 million in secondary. That's when the founders sell shares to investors. They filed fraudulent reimbursement claims, allegedly, with insurers for lab tests that weren't validated or necessary for patients. That's a big no-no. And they submitted fake chart notes from doctors to justify the test when insurers questioned their validity, allegedly. This is a total show. And this is, I think, sadly, another Theranos. Very interesting parallels between those two, including the fact that the Wall Street Journal was on this story first, and we have one of the journalists who were covering uBiome to sort this all out with us. Stick with us.
This Week in Startups is brought to you by Vanta. Compliance and security shouldn't be a deal breaker for startups to win new business. Vanta makes it easy for companies to get a SOC 2 report fast. Twist listeners can get $1,000 off for a limited time at vanta.com/twist. Dell's Precision and XPS product lines can bring your vision to life. They are masterfully crafted from premium materials like machined aluminum and carbon fiber. You can also sign up for a free IT consultation and a coupon for special pricing at launch.co/Dell. And OurCrowd. OurCrowd helps you invest early in pre-IPO companies alongside professional VCs. If you're interested in investing, you can join OurCrowd for free at OurCrowd.com/twist.
All right, Amy Dockser Marcus is here. She is a health and science reporter for the Wall Street Journal, and they've done, once again, incredible reporting. Really love the journal's investigative reporting on companies that maybe are behaving badly. Our friend John Carreyrou did his first media hit on This Week in Startups, and that hit actually resulted in some people who worked at Theranos, he told us later, contacting him because they saw him on the podcast. And so who knows, maybe out of this, some people will contact Amy and her coworkers over there, including Ann Wild-Matthews, who specializes in health insurance reporting. Welcome to the program, Amy.
Thank you.
So when did you first become aware of uBiome?
I actually became aware of uBiome before it was trying to sell these tests and get reimbursement. You know, they started out in 2013 as a kind of citizen science experiment. They asked people, they crowdfunded online. I mean, it was a fairly novel way of raising money at the time.
Yeah. And so what did they initially raise money for? What was the product and the promise? Because they did well in that Kickstarter, or I don't know if it was Indiegogo or Kickstarter to be specific.
Yeah. I mean, they raised around $350,000, not a huge amount of money, but what they did is they bootstrapped kind of their company that way. They asked people to buy a kit, and they would send it to you. And at home, you could send in generally a fecal sample, and they could do sequencing, and they would give you the results back. And the concept at the time was, let's get everybody monitoring their health, and let's collect their data. And by comparing what's happening in you to what's happening in other people, you might learn some insights about your health. At that time, they actually, even from the sort of moment of inception, ran into some ethical difficulties because there was an online debate that emerged in the wake of that campaign where some scientists and ethicists said, you know, this is not a traditional model of doing scientific research, and why didn't you go through an institutional review board to get permission?
Mm-hmm. Got it. And this was for a gut test. Forgive me that I'm not a scientist, but what?
I'm not either.
What in layman's terms, you know, just plain English, what are people trying to determine when they send in this fecal sample to get analyzed? What would they hope to get out of it? What was the sales pitch to, from the executives to the crowdfunding audience and then consumers?
So the microbiome, kind of in a loose layperson definition, is the community of microorganisms that live on and in our body. And it's actually a really promising scientific field that's attracted a lot of attention, because there's a sense that it's not only our genes that influences us, but it's also all the microorganisms that coexist with us that can affect our health. And so people were interested in finding out what microorganisms might be generating health problems. It allowed them not only to monitor themselves, but potentially to do dietary interventions. They could take different supplements. They could eat differently. They could figure out if they ate in a different way, maybe it would change how they feel, and they could tie it to something scientific. At the start, it wasn't supposed to be a clinical test. It was designed, the utility was really you wanting to know more about yourself, and you determined that it was useful, not your doctor or an insurance company.
And so this is part of the movement of people who are basically either doing biohacking or just really trying to understand their own bodies through information. Some people are doing those glucose monitors. Some people are using Fitbits or Oura Rings, studying their sleep. So this seems to be a real field of products in the world. And they were not telling you, hey, you should change your diet. They're just telling you, here's what we found in your gut. Correct?
Correct. I mean, it started more like as something that would be kind of fun in a way, but, I'm sure that they also wanted to make money, but at that time, that wasn't going to make tons of money. And that's kind of what led to the problem, thinking about how to monetize this.
Got it. And so this quantified self thing exists. That's real in the world. They charge $89 for this. But they quickly learned that wouldn't, and the founders are Jessica Richman and Zach Apte. And interestingly, like Elizabeth Holmes and her co-founder or COO, they were in a romantic relationship, correct?
They were, and according to the SEC's document, they actually got married in 2019.
So did they get married after all of this dropped or before?
Well, according to the SEC document, they just all they said was they got married in 2019. So that would have been in the course of all of this.
Wow. I hate to be cynical here and work against the concept of true love, but is this in some way a maneuver to get spousal privilege or something?
I don't know. I genuinely don't know. And they certainly were involved prior to that. That was kind of an open secret at the company.
So they went through Y Combinator, which is a very real program here in Silicon Valley, but the accelerators here don't do deep due diligence. They don't check, everything with a startup because it's only $100,000 check. And the Kickstarter Indiegogos of the world, they do a cursory check of these kind of projects. What's your sense of where the investment community or the platforms here drop the ball on their diligence? Because that, I think, for me as an investor, I find the most interesting. When something's an early startup, well, Indiegogo winds up having a successful Indiegogo is a signal, right, to an accelerator. The accelerator is a signal to angel investors and seed funds, who are then a signal to venture capitalists. And I know Andreessen Horowitz, the famous venture firm here, was a big backer of this company, correct?
I believe so. That I'm less certain about. But if you go through the indictment, which we did, I think that one thing you do take away is the level of deception and energy. I mean, again, it's alleged; they have to prove it. But the level of energy that went into trying to persuade people that what they were doing was real, and I've been thinking about it, and the way that investors can sort of protect themselves in the future. But if you really want to deceive people, I mean, a lot of energy went into deceiving investors and everyone else. I mean, they told the doctors one thing. They told the patients another thing. They lied to the insurance companies. I mean, the insurance companies clicked on this relatively early in the process, but still they filed around $300 million worth of claims. They got about $35 million in reimbursements. So they didn't get everything they asked for, but they still got $35 million in reimbursements.
Right. So that's real money. That's significant fraud. Hey, everybody. I thought I would have Christina Cacioppo on This Week in Startups to tell you about Vanta. Vanta, of course, has been sponsoring the pod and had a great reaction. And we're going to talk today just a little bit about what SOC 2 compliance is and why it's so important for SaaS products. Welcome to the pod, Christina.
Thank you so much for having me.
How long does this typically take, and what does it cost?
Yeah, so in the prior world, if you didn't use software like Vanta, often companies would take about a year on the project to figure out what they needed to do, get everything in order, work with the auditor, get the auditor what they needed to get their report. And they probably spent $20,000 on the low end, kind of can go up to hundreds of thousands of dollars depending on how large you are.
You figured out a way at Vanta to do this quicker, better, and cheaper. So what is the secret, and how can people use the product?
Yeah, absolutely. So secret is sort of like a lot of things. You turn a lot of this into software. So you write a standardized set of checks that a company needs to do. You base them on good security principles, and then you just monitor and alert all of those things. So the company gets a dashboard. They always know where they are. They're not, mucking around in spreadsheets. And the auditor gets just really detailed data so they can be sure that what the company says they're doing is actually happening.
All right, fantastic. Well, thanks so much for coming on and telling the audience why you should get your SOC 2, when you should get it, and how you should do it. And you've been very nice to our audience, giving them $1,000 off, which is a really significant and generous offer. Go to vanta.com/twist, vanta.com/twist to get $1,000 off your SOC 2. Thanks, Christina. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
To just give people a history here, because this is This Week in Startups, the crowdfunding was in 2013, and then the seed round occurred with 500 startups, YC, and Dave McClure, who's since had his own issues in the Me Too movement. The Series A was in June of 2014. They raised $4.5 million out of $14.5 million posts when they were at Y Combinator. That included A16 and some other folks. They graduated in 2014. Then they did their Series B, and they raised $17 million from Slow Ventures, Tuesday Capital, and 8VC. Then they did a Series C in September of 2018 and raised $83 million at a $600 million post. OS Fund, 8VC, Collaborative Fund, Starlight Ventures, and YC all invested. This is all according to the PitchBook data, which is generally correct, but it could be there could be issues there. We didn't actually validate all of this. So let's talk about the allegations. In April of 2019, uBiome's offices were raided by the FBI because of the billing practices related to its lab tests. And shortly after that, Richman and Apte went on leave as co-executives and later stepped down from the board. And then in September of 2019, just 6 months later or so, uBiome filed for bankruptcy protection, and its intellectual and property and other assets were sold off. And March 2021, March 18th, less than 2 weeks ago, the feds dropped this 33-page indictment. According to the claims, they filed fraudulent reimbursement claims with insurers for lab tests that weren't validated or necessary for patients, including some that involved retesting old samples. When the insurers questioned those claims, uBiome allegedly submitted a fake chart notes purportedly from doctors to justify the tests. This is where this goes off the rails. I mean,
it's quite elaborate.
Yeah, I mean, submitting a bunch of tests, that seems normal, okay. But then when you get pushback, to go and fake chart notes from doctors, that is, the definition of fraud.
I mean, there's a reason you have to do that, though. And again, this goes back to the fact that if you're going out of the realm of, this is kind of an interesting self-science experiment into, this is clinically valuable to me and my doctor in charting the course of, my disease or what to do, that's a different level of proof. When most of us feel ill, let's say we go to the doctor, we have a relationship with the doctor. The doctor meets with us in person, and if not, maybe has a Zoom call, gets to know us. I mean, in what they did in order to sort of cover all of this up was they set up a network essentially of online doctors. The consumers would fill out a list of symptoms online, and many of the doctors would sign off on those symptoms without having conversations with the consumers. So they didn't have any kind of relationship. The insurers, the reason why the company ended up kind of faking the medical records is because the insurers said, hey, you all have been ordering a lot of tests. We'd like the medical records so we could see evidence of the doctor-patient relationship and the doctor's notes on why the doctor felt the patient needed all of these tests. And those records did not exist.
So this is very interesting. And it goes to a wider trend that we're seeing, especially during the pandemic, which is all these doctors who were fighting off doing telemedicine because it was new and different have now 100% embraced it. And to the point at which we have services like Roman and HIMSS and others that do online consultations. And when they take you through those series of questions, it's an actual doctor who then asks you follow-up questions back and forth. And so what they did was, according to this case, is they actually those doctors didn't actually review these, or they didn't actually take notes, one or the other.
I mean, there were, we interviewed people who did have a sort of, Zoom call, once with a, or twice with a doctor. But in many cases, there wasn't any sort of, relationship that could be documented. And in some cases, the doctors who were asked to sign off on these tests, they were never informed by the company that the request for a test was going to be on an old sample. Many of the doctors understood that patients had new symptoms and were providing new samples, when in fact, all the company was doing was adding new microorganisms that they said their test could look for, asking the patient if they wanted to get resequenced again, and the patient would click yes. And no new sample was provided. There were, this was part of the ruse that was laid out in the document.
So how did this get leaked to the FBI? Was it the insurers who went to the FBI and said something's funny going on here? Was there an internal whistleblower? I didn't see in the series.
It's hard to know how it originated, but based on the documents, it sounds like the insurance companies, started doing due diligence on all of the reimbursements and, asked some questions. In our own reporting, we did quote from patients who they would get an explanation of benefits statement from their insurance company, which, insurers routinely send, and they would realize that their insurance company had been billed again, and that and they knew that they had not provided another sample. And some patients also inquired, hey, what's going on? This is another allegation that comes up. And again, this was part of the things that are alleged to be improper. And that is also when we go to the doctor generally, is required to ask us to have a copay. We're supposed to contribute into this. uBiome set up a system whereby they called it a pilot program, and they told patients that they uBiome would cover any cost of the test that insurers didn't reimburse. That pilot program extended for a very, very long time. And when their own general counsel told them that the pilot program might, get them into legal trouble, they created what they called a patient assistance program. And some of the patients said that nobody asked them to prove that they actually needed patient assistance. That those programs exist, and they're designed to help people who can't financially pay for medicine, but they were never asked for any kind of documents to show that they qualified for it.
Am I correct that Jessica and her co-founder are on the lam right now?
Yeah, that's what came out in the documents as well. They are fugitives from justice, according to the documents.
So nobody knows where they are? Is there any lead? Is this like Hannibal Lecter? They just disappeared to South America or something? I mean, this is turning into an HBO series.
Yeah, it's hard to know. It is quite. I mean, it's so interesting. I keep going back to this 2013 sort of event because it was born in something that seemed idealistic. And one of the things that came out in our 2014 story, where we were kind of chronicling the initial pushback on their new model, they got into kind of like an online debate with their critics. And one of the things they argued was that the ethical kind of regulations through the Institutional Review Board for approving human research, human subject research, that's like old school science, and they're trying to do something that's new. And
is that the citizen scientists kind of movement that they were?
Yes, but interestingly, in the end, they did go to a commercial IRB. Generally speaking, IRBs are inside institutions like academic, universities or hospitals. They did end up having to do that because to try to be within the realm of science, you have to follow certain rules. And from the beginning, they were pushing against those rules, arguing that they don't really fit. But in the world of testing, it's a highly regulated business, which that's what came out in all these legal documents, highly regulated.
And IRB is an institutional review board, which is a group formally designed to review and monitor biomedical research involving human subjects in accordance with the FDA regulations. And IRB has the authority to approve, require modifications, et cetera, disapprove research. So it's basically doing it the right way. Quantified self means you get your data and you interpret it as you wish. That seems like a fundamentally American concept. Probably nothing wrong with being a citizen scientist and interpreting your own medical data, but or do you disagree with that? Do you think?
No, I think citizen science. I mean, it's a movement that I have covered for years and years, and it's doing remarkable things. Citizen science again. I mean, in the beginning, patients were paying for their own tests out of pocket. It's designed to, like, if you want to study yourself and know yourself, this is a way to get access to sequencing of your microbiome, which gives you new insights and allows you to understand yourself better. But, as it evolved, I mean, but that is the next question. The question that they raised was, it's not just about you studying yourself. We believe that we are actually providing your doctor with important insights on how to treat you. And when you want to make that argument and you want to ask a health insurer to reimburse that, then you have to provide a different level of proof than you would if it's just you or I paying out of pocket for something that could be fun or something that could give us, insights that would make us change our diet or do something different.
Yeah, I literally had my yearly physical. I turned 50 yesterday. I had my physical yesterday. I turned 50 last year. And I literally did a bunch of this elective stuff. Do you want to do a scan of your heart? And then do you want to do like a full body scan? And, none of this stuff is reimbursable, I think. And it's interesting to get. And there's pros and cons. I'm curious, just as a journalist, when you wrote that October 24th story in 2014, which we'll pull up on the screen here if you're watching on YouTube, the ethics of experimenting on yourself, and this whole citizen scientist thing, this was a full 6 or 7 years before this whole thing collapsed. Did your spidey sense go off at all that this could be a fraud or that these people were a little, as we would say in Brooklyn, fugazi? Did anything kind of trigger in your mind?
Not at that point, because, at that point in time, I think that they saw themselves as part of this emerging landscape, which has really been, a fascinating landscape. If you think about like the 23andMe's of the world, where, trying to make it like less expensive for you to find out something that might be beneficial to yourself. But again, if you're going to build a business around it, it's not easy to make a lot of money for patients and consumers to pay for their own tests. If you think about what companies have been focusing on to monetize it, they have to either get a lot of people, entice a lot of people to pay smaller amounts of money so that they can grow a database, and then sell access to that database to companies that can pay a lot of money. Or another model would be the way that, uBiome went, which is charge a lot of money to insurance companies for clinical tests. But again, to do that, to go down that path where you're raising the amount of money involved here, you're going to have to come up with, a higher standard of proof than you or I might demand if we're just paying like $50 or $80 for a test that is fun for us.
Dell for Entrepreneurs is here to help you, founders, with all of your hardware and software needs. Here are some of the exclusive benefits for Dell founders. Entrepreneurs get free expedited delivery, exclusive offers, and up to 6% back in rewards. You can finance your IT project with Dell Financial Services, so that runway gets increased, and you'll have a dedicated startup IT advisor to help with any and all technical questions. And Dell has an incredible product line they want to tell you about. Whether you're a design enthusiast in your free time or a professional creative, Dell's Precision and XPS product lines can bring your vision to life. XPS and Precision laptops and desktop computers are masterfully crafted from premium materials and deliver a perfect balance of size, weight, and durability. Plus, we already know Dell is the world's #1 monitor company, so you can pair your new XPS or Precision machine with the perfect monitor to realize your vision. Dell's monitors elevate your creative vision with 4K, 8K, HDR, and my favorite, curved displays. I'm actually on a 49-inch curved display right now. It is bonkers. I am like literally 10% more productive when I got this 49-inch, and I was 20% more productive when I got the 38-inch after doing those 27-inch ones for so long. I love these Dell monitors. They're my favorite. In fact, I buy them for everybody on my team because I want them to be more productive because I'm the boss. I pay their salaries. Dell for Entrepreneurs is here to help with any IT project you may have. Go to launch.co/Dell, launch.co/Dell, and sign up for a free IT consultation and a coupon for special pricing. Okay, let's get back to this amazing episode. I'll tell you where this failed for me, just as a person who invests in companies for the last 10 years and a formal journalist. So I started at journalism where you are, and now I'm on the other side of the table as an investor. When you get to your Series B and you're raising over $10 million and there's a lead investor, in this case, the Series B in 2016, I think 8VC was the lead. Somebody's got to diligence this stuff and talk to the insurance companies and talk to the customers, talk to the doctors, talk to employees. That's kind of what you're paid to do as a venture capitalist. So somewhere between the Series B and Series C, OS Fund, the lead on the Series C, and 8VC, the lead on the Series B, I think they have some serious answering to do to their LPs, the limited partners who give them money, on how they did this. And even the Series A, if A16Z was the lead, it was $4.5 million. That's not a lot of money to Andreessen Horowitz, but who knows of that 4.5 what they did. When John Carreyrou, your colleague who did the amazing Pulitzer Prize, should have won level coverage of Theranos, for some reason he didn't get a Pulitzer. Unbelievable. They need to come up with a "we screwed up" Pulitzer that they'd give 5 years later when they miss something. This is just my suggestion, and that would be number one on my list of things that Pulitzer dropped. What incredible coverage and inspiring. But there is some parallel here. He got a lot of pushback that, and some folks said Elizabeth Holmes was being targeted because she was a female founder, pulling the female founder card. Oh, we finally have a female founder who's a billionaire. Did you get any pushback on this one as well? Because Jessica was a female, obviously, and that people said, "Oh, we're just giving female founders a hard time."
No, that's not on that particular thing, but more along the lines, and you would probably have an answer to this question even better than I, because you're the investor. But I mean, like a lot of these companies, the founders are very charismatic. I mean,
yes.
and as you know, you're an investor, you said. So, I mean, don't you find that when there's someone with a compelling story and a charismatic personality, that can carry you a long way, right?
I mean, in fact, one of the number one traits of successful founders is charisma. Because if you think about what you're doing, it's kind of like Shackleton the Explorer. I don't know if you've ever seen the ad he put a classified out that famously said, like, looking for men to go to the North Pole, low pay, extreme hardship, injury and death, almost a certainty, show up on Sunday. And it's like a famous, want ad. And yes, charisma is how you get employees to join the company. Charisma is how you raise money. Charisma is how you convince the public. Steve Jobs, the reality distortion field, where he would claim that they created something that, Walt Mossberg, another famous Wall Street Journal reporter, would have covered 4 years earlier from another company where the Palm Pilot had done what the iPhone was doing. And Steve Jobs would say, oh no, nobody's ever done this before, right? And the distortion field would be dropped. But it really is uncanny, the similarities here. And this must have come up when you did the coverage, which is Elizabeth Holmes dropped out of Stanford before doing any real research. I think it was in her first year. And then Jessica Richman, she kept talking about her PhD and her Twitter bio, et cetera, but it wasn't even wasn't even medically related. And they both went to Stanford. So there's like a little checkbox there in terms of, dropped out of school like Bill Gates and Zuckerberg did from Harvard. Dropped out. And they both crazily were CEOs who presented at TED Med. So when you think about these check boxes, I think you're so right about the charisma thing. And I also think there's an unconscious or maybe even conscious strategy, but sometimes charismatic people, who's also charismatic? Serial killers, sociopaths, and you may not want to say these things, but I can tell you that out of every 100 founders I meet, there are going to be 3 or 4 of them. There's going to be a lot of them that are on the spectrum of Asperger's, and then there's going to be a bunch of them who might be actually sociopaths who get drawn to this because it's this incredible challenge, and they could be narcissists and all these other great things. In fact, a lot of the great ones are narcissists. It's a pretty good skill, but it could tip over into this, which is you just think might is right by any means necessary, bend the rules, don't ask for permission, and then all of a sudden you're committing just outright fraud. Very interesting that they both were at TED Med in the same, 2-year period.
There's certain places that you go and certain things you do, again, that would present a narrative to investors and to others that, you're doing something that's cutting edge. I don't know if you noticed this detail in the indictment. I just found it kind of fascinating, which is that as part of the indictment, they noted that in an email correspondence with a reporter, Jessica lied about her age, and she told the reporter that she was under 40 years old. And you might think to yourself, why is that important? But again, it's important in building a narrative for investors and for others that, that you're young, you're cutting edge, you're part of this rising generation. And they noted in the indictment that once the article was out, she linked to it in her bio and in materials that she showed the investors, so that they would have a legitimate sort of outside source showing that she was a young investor, a young rising star in the world of medicine.
It's so deranged, and it reminds me of Elizabeth Holmes, who lowered her voice famously to sound more like Steve Jobs, allegedly, and also, with the turtleneck. It's so weird. And, this 30 under and the 40 under lists, I know you don't do those at the Wall Street Journal, but my God, Fortune or Forbes or whoever, one of those publications that, is just does these disastrous lists. I every year I get people in my portfolio asking me to submit them. And I'm like, you know what? Those lists mean nothing. They're literally just a way to get traffic to Fortune or Forbes' website, and they're just hoping you put it in your bio and send traffic to them. It's literally meaningless.
But it's meaningful to some people who use it as a piece of a story. I mean, this was another thing. If you went to their website, which we did when we were reporting the story, I mean, they did list illustrious scientists who, that were their partners, supposed partners in doing legitimate scientific experiments. But when you'd start running down those experiments and, why did they share a kind of credit on a scientific paper, or who did what and everything, sometimes it would be that samples, the microbiome samples that they had collected, they allowed legit scientists to do work on them. And then those scientists, as is traditional in science, would credit them, sharing a name on a paper. So again, building up credentials, using signals to people that reinforces a narrative that engenders trust.
It's very interesting when you think about grifters and the techniques they use. One of the great techniques is the proximity to power, celebrity, or notability. And so there are a bunch of coaching scammers, like life coaching scammers, who get people out of $10,000, $20,000, for these things. And what they do is they hire celebrities to come speak at their events, take pictures with them, do goof around with them. Then they put that on their website. Then an unsuspecting Mark comes to the website, sees them with, Mark Wahlberg or, John Travolta in the two examples I saw, and Al Pacino, whoever wants to get $50K for a speaking gig, and then they convert that. And it's called social proof in Silicon Valley. Social proof is the New York Times covered us, and you link to it. But what people will do is they'll say covered in the New York Times, covered in, Yahoo News or whatever, but they hire some PR company to file a press release, which then gets listed on Yahoo News, but it's a scam. It's just PR Web or one of those PR ones. So this is all in that same, technique. Cynically, or, there's the criminal actions, and then there's bending the truth and trying to use these social proof techniques. But what's important for people to understand here, for the founders who are listening, is when you sell shares in your company and you do these techniques where you lie about your company, and you're lying in the way, how does the SEC look at selling shares in a company while lying to investors? How does the SEC look at that in your mind, Amy?
Well, I think we have the 33 pages that indicate how they look at it.
And I tell you, I've had this happen where I had a startup that had a team slide on their website and in their deck. They had team members who were no longer there. And okay, it could have been a mistake, or they maybe didn't change it because they wanted that. And I told the founder, listen, you can't, when somebody complained and said, these two people are not working there anymore. And I said, you got to keep that page up to date. If you're selling to investors, a story, and the story is made up or no longer true, the SEC are very principled people. I think you would agree. And they do not take lightly to people bilking investors out of their money. It's a very deadly serious to them.
That is another story that we ended up doing actually about this company. Speaking of, having things on your website that proved to be incorrect. We did a story about how they had supposed customer testimonials, photos, and then quotes from people who claim to have benefited from taking their tests. And we did a story on how the photos were from Shutterstock. I mean, they weren't of real people. And we showed that the same photo had been used to advertise other things. And, again, these small things, taken separately might not seem dramatic, right? But they do add up to thinking about how you're presenting your story to the public.
Such a great insight, an example, because sometimes when you're pitching your company, you have, a customer reference and a customer quote. That's true. But the customer's identity needs to be protected for whatever reason. And what I've always mentored founders in is to put a stock photo in there and say, meet Jane. She is one of our customers. This is a picture of a stock photo. So Jane, just so you know, isn't a stock photography model and a customer of ours. We're just putting a stock photo in there. It's like a fun joke. And her name's not actually Jane, but this is a real person. And she is 34 years old. And she does have 2 kids, and she does live in Brooklyn. Like, you kind of just own it, right? And then you have no issues. Yeah. And when we look at this kind of fraud, what do you think the outcome will be here? They're going to catch them at some point. That's obvious. Like, you can only be on the run for so long. I mean, I don't think we have too many examples of people who've gone on the lam for this level of fraud. We're talking tens of millions of dollars in fraud, probably closer to 100 million between the money they got 35 million in insurance fees, plus they raised over 100 million. So you put that together, this like Bonnie and Clyde on the run thing. I mean, they're going to get pinched.
I mean, I don't have any sort of insight into that. I would assume that this would be very hard to sustain for the rest of your life, being on the lam.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look in the indictment, I mean, the amount of years in jail, if they're convicted, it's quite significant.
Do you ever wish you invested early in some of the best performing IPOs of 2019 and 2020? Well, OurCrowd investors did invest early in many of those awesome IPOs. With OurCrowd, accredited investors can invest directly and easily in startups early before they IPO or get bought. OurCrowd investors have benefited from companies IPOing like Beyond Meat and Lemonade. Both have seen big returns since going public, obviously. And some of the companies have been acquired by the likes of Intel, Nike, Microsoft, Oracle, and Uber. Yum, yum. The investment professionals at OurCrowd have already invested hundreds of millions of dollars in over 200 companies with dozens of exits. OurCrowd is investing in medical technology, super important, breakthroughs in ag tech and food production, everybody on the planet's impacted by that one, solutions in the multi-billion-dollar robotic industry, and so much more. I recently wet my beak and placed a small bet on Cyabra, a company that uses AI to uncover disinformation and expose fake news on social media. If you don't have the stomach for early stage deals, they understand that. OurCrowd offers later stage deals as well. For example, our sales guy Matt just invested in Plenty, an indoor vertical farming startup alongside Jeff Bezos and SoftBank's Vision Fund. How often do you get a chance to invest alongside top-tier firms like that? Not very often. So join OurCrowd. The account is free if you go right now to OurCrowd.com/twist. Very important to put that /twist in to get that free account. OurCrowd.com/twist. Okay, let's get back to this amazing episode. Which is the worst fraud here, the financial fraud or the healthcare fraud, in that people might have gotten information that was bogus, and then made decisions based on it, which was the Theranos one, which was really crazy. I don't know if you saw Jean Gassier, who worked for Steve Jobs, had done his blood work at Stanford and with Theranos at one of their Walgreens or whatever, and the two results were so far off that he wrote a public blog post about it and emailed Elizabeth Holmes, who never returned. But people, it turned out in the Theranos case, were actually making health decisions with their doctor to take certain drugs based on their blood work that they wouldn't have needed to take. So that's very serious. Is this getting to that level? Are there examples where people changed not just their diet, but maybe did something that could have been, lethal, God forbid, or against their health? Or unknown?
I mean, we unknown. I mean, we didn't find evidence of that, but I mean, that doesn't mean that it didn't happen. But I mean, when you're testing these samples, I mean, I guess a lot of people, primarily that we talk to, people change their diet, at least with the Smart Gut one. I'm not sure what changes people made with Smart Jane, if any. But I think primarily here, the allegations centered more on the fraud, the bilking of insurers, which in the end can raise insurance premiums for all of us. I mean, that is one of the consequences. Yeah.
Any civil lawsuits come after this yet? Like, because you would think if you made those dietary changes, you might want to sue. I'm curious.
I mean, it could be. This is still new.
So new, yeah. And the investors in this, generally, we don't see investors file charges against this because they're so embarrassed to have this happen in their portfolio. They tend to just write it off. But have you heard anything from the investors yet? Or have you talked to the investors in the company? Or do they just, when a journalist calls, the investors just say, we're not going to talk about this. It's too embarrassing.
Yeah, this is just the start. I mean, we'll have to see how it unfolds. We'll continue to report on it.
Yeah, I think that's, for me, it's a really big lesson in diligence matters. Do really good diligence. Talk to the customers. Now, that still doesn't mean people can't fake bank statements. There really is almost so much you can do. Bernie Madoff, there were people reporting on his ridiculously consistent results through markets that were very inconsistent at times. And it took, 3 decades for that to actually come out. So you can get hoodwinked. You could get bamboozled even if you do diligence. But boy, it feels like there was a lack of diligence that was done here. I think we covered everything. Congratulations on, this great coverage. Once again, the Wall Street Journal doing amazing investigative journalism. Do you guys, when you, just so the audience understands the cost of doing investigative journalism like you do, we know journalists get paid well at the Wall Street Journal, but how much time goes into something like this and how many journalists to really cover, a case like this? Does this take a month to do a story, 2 or 3 months?
Well, it's not the only story we're working on, right? So we're balancing a lot of different things, but I do want to put a plug in for the fact that any kind of story, not only just investigative stories, but all the stories we do, people don't see behind the scenes the team that goes into it. I mean, you have people that do the graphics. We had a lot of graphics that were in our stories. You have people that do the photos. You have the layers of editors, and you have obviously the time that reporters spend on the stories. So it really is
1,000 hours, 500 hours. What do you think the staffing hours would be? Thousands of hours, right?
It's so hard to estimate, honestly. I mean, you're intensely working on something and then you're also monitoring it. It's so hard to do it. That's why it's great that, to have staff reporters who can work on something over the course of years, follow a company for years and years. That's a real privilege.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lost art. I mean, the amount of work that go into these kind of efforts, whether it's Theranos or this, and it really is the best of journalism, and it's something that's worth supporting. So for those of you who are out there, paying for a subscription to the Wall Street Journal is a great way to have this backstop in society that we need, because a lot of times these stories get broken by journalists, not by the FBI, not by the insurance companies, or when they do get cracked open, you need only see any of the great investigative journalism films that have come out, over the decades, The Insider, Spotlight. I mean, it's such an important function in society, and we really need to support it, and we need to have you keep doing this great work. So we All the President's Men, of course. Yes, my great researchers are. That is the GOAT journalism movie. But I will say, I think The Insider is my favorite. Okay, this is a good question first to end on, Amy. Rank Spotlight, The Insider, All the President's Men. Favorite number 1, 2, and 3.
You didn't do Shattered Glass also.
Oh my God, Shattered Glass with Hayden Christensen.
Yeah, so many.
Amazing. I was coming up as a journalist when that all went down. Wow. So if you have to think about this with the story and the performances. Wow.
I'm a Boston native, so I gotta go Spotlight. I gotta go Spotlight just because I want to do a shout out to Boston.
Yeah. Okay. Boston Globe shout out. I'm going to go with The Insider. I just thought that film was just so well done.
Yeah.
Who's your number 2? We'll just do 1 and 2.
I don't know.
The Insider.
Yeah, they were.
Or Shattered Glass.
Putting me on the spot. I love them all.
Okay.
I love journalism.
Shattered Glass is my number 2. Shattered Glass is just such an underrated film. I was actually talking to it's very weird in my life, Amy. I have the @Jason handle on Twitter and Instagram. What happens typically is people start group chats and they mean to add their friend Jason Smith, but it auto-populates and they just click me.
Oh, wow.
And I was recently added to a group of German teenage girls who are super fans of Harry Styles and Hayden Christensen.
How fun. And
so I've been chatting with them because I let them know they put the wrong person in. But then they had a lot of questions for me, like if I knew anybody famous. And I said, have you guys like Hayden Christensen? Have you seen Shattered Glass? They're like, no. I was like, okay, go watch that and report back to me. That was last week. So they're going to report back to me there.
You've inspired a whole new generation of Shattered Glass viewers, because that was definitely before their time, if they're teenagers.
Definitely. I mean, it was very interesting in the 90s that the plagiarism that we saw was during this period of time when, and I'm assuming you were around for this. I'm not sure your age exactly, but when I was coming up in the 90s, the idea of getting paid $1, $2, or even $3 a word writing for Wired or some Condé Nast publication or the New Republic, whatever, there were these star feature writers. And sometimes even Bret Easton Ellis or some famous novelist would do a feature story because Esquire would give them $25,000 to just have a cover story by Bret Easton Ellis or something of a celebrity profile. But being a celebrity journalist, Sebastian, who's the guy, Sebastian, who did A Perfect Storm? He was in that.
Yes, Sebastian Junger, something.
Younger, yeah.
Younger.
So anyway, there was this whole group of this cohort, if you remember, and it led to some weird moments. Jason Blair and Stephen Glass were amongst them, of just people who outright plagiarized because they wanted to be famous investigative / feature journalists. It's very weird. All right.
Lots of charismatic people in the world.
Yeah, we get them on both sides of the table. Charismatic journalists, charismatic investors, and now, of course, charismatic. It does say something about gender and CEOs, that we have enough female CEOs now that there will be some number of frauds. And here we are.
Everyone's a person.
Exactly. Everybody's responsible for their own behavior. All right. Thanks so much for coming on, Amy. And thanks for the great journalism. We appreciate it. I'm speaking on behalf of all Americans and society in general and the human race. We really appreciate you doing this work. We'll see you next time on This Week in Startups.